Hello, Laika. Thank you for joining me for this interview. Today is August 18th of 2020, and this is Fernanda Espinosa interviewing artist Layqa Nuna Yawar for the Pandemic Project at the Archives of American Art, Smithsonian Institution. And yeah, welcome, Layqa. Can you just introduce yourself and also tell me how you're doing?
Hi, thank you for inviting me. My name is Layqa Nuna Yawar. I am an immigrant artist born as Lenny Correa in Ecuador, South America. I am part of Diaspora Andina, and I live in the US, and I make murals and visual art and public artwork based around the idea of organizing people of color to amplify our messages on a large scale. And I am doing well. I've been drinking my coffee and I'm excited to talk to you. Thank you for the invitation.
Awesome. I'm also drinking my coffee since it's morning. So as you know, as I mentioned, we'd like to know more about how artists have been experiencing all of these changes in these last few months. Can you just start by telling me a little bit more about your experience, personal and as an artist, over these past few months?
Okay. Bueno, al principio, I was in Ecuador. I just come back from Ecuador, Estados Unidos, when the pandemic started to really take hold of the US. So when I stopped being able to go outside and had to sort of rethink everything in life, it sort of made me feel super depressed and confused. Y al mismo tiempo acá en Estados Unidos, leadership has not been present, so it was a big mess. Creatively, no podía hacer nada because I make art on the outside. I make art based on being with people and connecting to people. And so from that point on, I could not longer do that. And I could not see a future for me doing anything like that. Entonces estaba bien loco, I didn't know what was going to happen to my practice, or I was very insecure in the future. But as I went through that grief y todo pasó, I started to understand more of the causes of the pandemic, what comes after myself, started to listen to myself. And again, I found la respuesta in actually making art, because that's how I survive. And it's what's helped me just live through migration and through my own complexes and my own fears. So making artwork is what helped me get through it. And then slowly I started making more artwork and finding new ways of thinking about what it means to be an artist. En un tiempo de pandemia, I started sort of slowing down myself. Y estoy trabajando con a new speed. I no longer, I want to get rid of this pressure of capitalism or the idea of producing. And I've been trying to do that for a long time, but ahora es como más fácil because I think a lot making art and having any sort of interaction right now is more meaningful or more focused. Porque it takes a lot even to go out. We no longer can go and watch a movie because you could get sick. So what does it mean for me to actually go out and make a project and make a mural? And who am I going to interact with? And how important is that? So it's just brought in another level of sort of importance to making artwork. Y al mismo tiempo estoy in the middle of figuring out what that looks like. It's been a few months. And I feel like we're just at the beginning of this curve. I see this going on for like the foreseeable future, like at least 3 years or something like that. No sé. But it's been like, yeah, kind of like a curve. And I think we're just like about to see the ramifications of it. So it's been that.
When you started making art again after feeling, or what you described, feeling low for some time, what kind of things did you start working on?
So at principio, I was like not really sure of how to frame my artwork because I was not able to interact with people, but that was just the internal, so like immediate response, because I still could connect to people through, you know, what we're doing right now, which is Zoom or like talking on the phone or just being part of a community. And I think what was great about that is that by me reaching out to community, I was also able to be healed by community. So I started working with different organizations and just offer them art for what they needed. So I started working for an organization in Newark called the Bound Community Corporation, and they needed some posters. And I reached out to like make the road New York and New Jersey, and I would be working on different projects. And so that like allowed me to kind of create again. And before like the sort of larger scale murals and all the time that it took for me to create like educational projects and do the teaching and do the painting, all of that was out of the way. So I could sort of rethink that approach through like the internet or on paper. And so that helped me out. At the same time, I started doing como un proyecto que estoy haciendo ahora that's like based on my own family's immigrant narrative from Ecuador to Estados Unidos. And I'm doing that in a virtual reality space. So I'm working with 3D graphics, and I took this time to sort of like teach myself a lot of new programs, and also started playing with clay and just found different ways of challenging myself. And that helped me out a lot. Porque al mismo tiempo es kind of like mi terapia to like make things and create art. And then I started growing plants a lot more because I think it reminded me of like doing that with my mom when I was a kid. Oh, al mismo tiempo I feel like I am center and more calm when I'm close to the earth and to mountains. And I just really enjoy putting plants on the ground and making them grow and like taking care of them. I think that was also like just me taking care of myself through that. And I don't see like I don't like to separate the art from my life because I did that for a long time. So I just see all of this as like the creative process. And another thing that I did was sort of figure out how to be on the outside more. So I bought a bicycle and I go out more and like try to be careful, because I think what we're lacking right now in this social distancing times is the idea of community or interacting with people. Como like ver a tu familia o amistades, it just becomes something that we have to try even more. So yeah, that's what that.
So Idea mentioned this before, but you are in your studio in Newark, and I know you've been based in Newark for some time. Can you talk a little bit more about how your community, whoever you call your community, and you have met these new times, both the pandemic, but also all the changes and the consequences of what's been happening?
Yeah, I think we're just the beginning of the changes, or again, like that curve of change. I found it super interesting that, you know, we were all isolated for months, and then the first time I was able to see the Newark community was when we went all out to protest George Floyd's murder. And it was a beautiful, interesting environment of community, you know, being policed at the same time and having like drones like fly around and like, you know, standing up against oppression and doing so with your friends and your community and people you haven't physically seen for so long. That was a wonderful moment. And I think Newark's continued to rise up to the moment and react in like a very progressive way. For example, one night I was invited to witness the removal of the Christopher Columbus statue in the city, which was an act from City Hall, and there were community members there. And they were burning Palo Santo, and it was like a beautiful like drum circle, and people came out at the middle of the night, and so that was like a moment of community that was being like pushed by governance, right? So there's like this interesting in between right now, and I feel very lucky to be in a city where I can work with my friends and community members for the things I believe in, and also do that as an artist, because I was also able to help along with like 150 other artists and organizers to do a ground mural that said abolish white supremacy and all Black Lives Matter. Again, like a wonderful action of community, and now I'm working on different murals that we're developing, so that's been super healing. And I think we only see a few examples of that in the US. I feel pretty blessed about it. So I'm trying to, again, to sort of be aware of that and also think about como cuál es el futuro de esto, and how can we keep growing, and how can we push that curve upward and continue. So yeah, I think we're just at the beginning of that. And yeah, it feels like out of all the anxiety and, you know, the super horrible place that we're in, that chaos moment can also allow us to have some hope and to push for what we believe in. So yeah, I'm kind of hopeful about it.
With the people that you've been going out and for the protest, and that you've been working with, and just at large your community, what kind of conversations have you been having in these times?
There's been a lot of conversations what to do next. I've had conversations about, you know, actions that are not sanctioned, about immediate protest, about long-term change, about just like private change. I've had conversations about how to support each other through business and money. I've had conversations about how to support ourselves as artists. We've had conversations about how to creatively answer the moment, work with collaborators on kind of reframing how to interact and do this, like become this like Zoom sort of cultural hive. And within all of those conversations, I think I'm super blessed that it's all been about looking forward, And my immediate community is super aware of what the problems are, because I believe that Newark being a Black city and a brown city, it knows that part of, like, the most powerful part of change is to envision a future as opposed to like stay in the moment of pain, which is something that the artists here and I do with my art myself, which is not, for example, like show oppression, but show what could come after oppression. And I feel like that's the vibe and the idea that I get from talking to people in Newark, and I feel super, super, again, hopeful and happy that that's where I'm at and what we're doing. Yeah. And these are very interesting questions. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I'm enjoying our conversation, and it also makes me think about the things we imagine in the future. In that context, where do you see your work going in the future, or what role do you think it will play?
So that's interesting, because so a lot of what I was doing before was working with institutions like universities or schools, pero todo eso está como like up in the air right now, right? Like the whole model is changing. Schools, or some are not opening, others are opening somehow. So I'm still not sure how to tackle like those opportunities, or like my planned projects as far as engaging to people. I mean, the easy answer is to have workshops on muralism through Zoom, but that's not ideal to me. And also, how can you produce like a physical mural if people cannot come together? All of that right now, it's up in the air for me. So I'm trying to start to sort of envision that future and like think about different ways of doing this. And right now, I don't have a solid answer, but I have a few ideas. Como, por ejemplo, like how can we arrive at, as a group of people, how can we arrive at consensus? And what does agency mean when you're creating together? Does that mean like voting on a design? Does that mean giving someone agency to make those decisions? Does that mean picking one part of the community or one person of the community to represent the rest? It could be, I might just get into a lot of trouble and people have like hurt feelings. So I don't know what that's gonna look like, but so far that's where I'm at. I'm trying different projects with different ideas, and we'll see where that goes. Other than that, I think for my personal career or like survival as an artist, I have to also challenge myself and figure out different ways of, one, because we're living in a capitalist country, how to survive within that system, how to understand the new system, and how to properly sustain a practice, right? And there's a lot of institutions out there right now that are trying to help artists, so I'm taking advantage of that. I'm seeing myself as a business as well, so I'm trying to like push towards that and how to take advantage of those systems. Whereas before I wasn't doing that so much, because I could survive as like one way of being an artist, but now I have to think in different ways of doing that. And then that just allows me to sort of make the art that I want to make. And I think right now what I have a lot more of is time and space to sort of make art that's more private and more about myself, because I have sort of mental space for it. Not that I don't enjoy making work with community, that's sort of like what feeds me, but it's also allowing me to do both. So I think that's what the trajectory of my artwork is going, is like to be more sustainable, to sort of fit into the new system, and also to make more space for my personal voice, because that's just gonna help me grow as a public artist as well. Yeah, and it's been interesting to allow myself to do that, because it feels like growing plants again. Like, you know, all of these projects and my art itself is the plant that I'm trying to grow from, you know, where we've been left. Yeah, so it's again, very hopeful moment for me.
Have you been doing any personal work to document or mark these times?
Not so much to mark the times. I think the work that I'm making is a result, but it's not speaking to that. Like I said, like having a lot of time to think about like my family, and like I've been reading about a lot about castas, and I've been doing all this research, which is guided by my experience, but not because of the pandemic, not guided by the pandemic as a theme, but it's just allowing me to like research and kind of create work about the things that maybe I wouldn't have had time to do before because I got busy, but not in relation to the pandemic per se. Yeah, but maybe, all right, so maybe the work that I'm doing con organizaciones and, for example, the city of Newark, that is related to the pandemic, it's related to the moment, it's a reaction to the political realities that we live. So then that side of my work is totally related, but the personal not so much. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Layqa. Before I end our recording, I would like to ask you if there's anything that I didn't bring up that you would like to document in this interview.
I think what I've been enjoying and seeing a lot more of is the engagement from youth and our current TikTok generation. I am super like impressed and elated by what I'm seeing, and I think we should make space for that and celebrate it. The next generation is not apathetic, that they're doing a lot, and you know, that just fills me up. That's it.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.